All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? First and foremost, just want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining this public engagement session for the Resilient Southwest Building Code Collaborative. My name is Brian Manwaring. I'm a facilitator with Southwest Decision Resources, and I'll be facilitating this evening. So we have a couple initial slides, and then we'll introduce the team. Just wanted to first go over the objectives for this evening session. So from a participant perspective, we're hoping that you walk away learning more about the collaborative and its work. We also hope to gather some input and want to give you an opportunity to share input on local priorities, challenges, and community needs. Third, we hope you learn how building codes impact livability, including affordability and resilience. We'll also discuss the framework guiding building code development and how that works for this project. And then we'll also discuss a little bit about how the collaborative's work differs from the existing current local and state building code adoption processes. So those are the items we'll be covering today. And this is what our agenda looks like. So we'll do some introductions with our project team. We'll cover the project purpose and background, and then we'll go into Building Codes 101, which is a primer on building codes. And then we'll talk a little bit about the framework, the project framework, the risk and hazard piece of the project. From there, we'll talk a little bit about rural and residential considerations and how those are being factored into the project. And then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion from there. So with that, I just want to let you also know that the meeting is being recorded. And then, and then let's do some quick introductions of our project team. So you'll see some pictures on the slide here, but you should also see nearly all of these folks in the video windows as well. So we'll go around the horn here, and I'll just ask folks to provide their name, location, organization, your role in your organization, and your experience working on these kinds of issues. So with that, Leslie, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Ethan. I am a sustainability manager at the City of Tucson in the Planning and Development Services Department. I've been at the city for just over 20 years and worked in various sustainability focused and natural resource focused projects. And I am also serving as the local project coordinator in support of Kevin and Tristan, who could be here tonight, who are the project managers. Clayton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Clayton Trevelyan. I serve as a building official for the City of Tucson. I've been a building official for the past 10 years and been with the city also for 20 years. But I came out of the trades. I was in the construction industry before that. But my passion is buildings and improving the world around me, especially as it relates to sustainability topics, green building. I've worked on a number of policies for the City of Tucson directly associated with green building as it relates to building code, and spend a good majority of my time on code adoptions, policy development, and so forth. Mike.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Baxley. I'm with the City of Tempe. I am the building official here and the deputy director over permits, engineering, plan review, and inspections. I've been a building official, now for 18 years with multiple jurisdictions, and have had lots of experience in code development over my tenure, and currently we have adopted a volunteer green building code and created positions to support that here in Tempe to advance those types of things within the built environment. And with that, we'll go to Shay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharia Jimenez. I'm a designer with my own business, Cuadro. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. I provide architectural drafting and design services. I work a lot with residential clients. But I also have a background. I've been practicing architecture now for almost 15 years, and 10 of that was commercially in affordable housing. And also have experience with planning projects. I helped the city here of Tucson with the ADU policy work. And my role here in this project is really working on the equity piece of the project and other aspects of technical support. So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Greg Kinkle with Quest Energy Group. I'm a principal over here. We're a engineering consulting firm that focuses in sustainability, energy, commissioning, sustainability consulting. We've been working here in the Valley in Phoenix for 20 years now. And we do a lot of private work, but we also, I do a lot of work with like the city of Tempe. We help them with their adoption of IGCC. So we work in codes, but our job on this project is to help with technical guidance and help with real world implementation of what it might look like to actually implement these codes. With that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. Lisa Clark with Southwest Decision Resources. As Brian mentioned, we are the facilitation team working on this project and have worked on many other natural resource related projects, a lot of community engagement efforts, as well as working with municipalities in planning. Back to you, Brian.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And just maybe a slightly deeper introduction for myself. So Brian Manwaring, I'm with Lisa at Southwest Decision Resources. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. And as Lisa mentioned, we're facilitators here, and I've been doing this work. I've been engaging groups, working with groups and the public for a couple decades on different kinds of public processes. So yeah, again, welcome to everybody. Thank you again for coming at a reasonably late hour. So before we get started too, just want to do a quick overview of this is Zoom webinar, not Zoom meetings. So just a couple of features to be aware of. So you should see a chat feature on your toolbar there. Just note that chat, if you do chat, it will come to the panelists and the organizers here. So we'll see that. So if you have any issues or need anything, please do use the chat feature. In the middle there is a Q&A panel. So you can ask questions through the Q&A panel. You can also use chat if you'd like. But Q&A panel offers a slightly more functionality. So if you do that, we can either respond through text, in which case you'll see the initial question and the response, and everybody will be able to see that, or we'll respond verbally to that question. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature throughout this session. We will look to respond to clarifying questions throughout the presentations. More substantive questions we might reserve till the end session. There is also a hand raise or a raise hand feature. Just note that again, that will come to the organizers and to the panelists. And then there is a show captions feature if you'd like to have captions be displayed on your screen. All right. So we're going to move to a quick discussion question. I'm going to turn over the screen here in 1 second, but just to give you first and foremost, a working definition before we dive into this, and just note that your responses will be anonymous. So, working definition of resilience in the built environment is the ability of a community to withstand and recover from a disaster. So, a resilient built environment is one which avoids both immediate harm, that is, immediate harm to persons, communities, property, and nature during an event, and also long-term damage to nature and a community's quality of life in the months, years, and generations after the event. So I'm going to turn over the screen, and the questions we're going to pose here are: what does a resilient community look like? And what features and qualities come to mind?
Okay, so I'm going to be putting a whole link here in the chat box. Please follow that link. It'll send you to a separate, it'll send you to your browser. So it'll take you out of Zoom for a moment. I'm also going to share my screen here. There's a QR code available here. So if you're on your computer and want to do this on your phone, you're welcome to do that. If you don't want to go through the chat box, you can always go directly to menti.com and just use this code up at the top of the screen. And then that'll give you the opportunity to answer this question. You can answer as many times as you like. We just ask that you put one thought per response. So we'll give you a couple of minutes here. One response so far. Don't be afraid to throw something out there. Please let us know if you're having any difficulty accessing. The one response so far is that a resilient community knows how to solve problems and resolve differences. Thank you. More stuff coming in. Connected, adaptable, prepared, working together to recover and thrive after challenges. Culture of constant improvement. That QR code out of the way. Benefiting the common good. I'll give you just another maybe 30 seconds or so. You know, this is a big question, so appreciate everyone giving thoughtful answers. Helping each other, the type of infrastructure that's there, services keep running, diversity. Yeah, these are great. Feel free to keep adding your answers. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, but feel free to keep this open. We may use the same Mentimeter later on in the meeting. And also feel free to add more responses here. We'll be collating all this at the end of the webinar.
All right. So thank you, Lisa, and thanks everybody for those responses. And please do remember to if you have questions throughout these presentations, please do use the Q&A feature to ask those questions, and we'll respond to those as we have an opportunity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie to talk a little bit about our project purpose and background. Leslie.
So I'm here just to give you a little bit of context before we launch into more detailed presentations. This is the goal of the collaborative. The upshot being we're looking at how do we create climate resilient and people-centric buildings. This has never been done before, certainly not at this scale. So this is a really ambitious goal, and the later presentations are going to talk about how we're attempting to tackle this. Next slide. So here's who the collaborative is, or at least at this point. We've got 12 jurisdictions across Arizona and New Mexico. The jurisdictions really were the ones to come together and say, hey, we want to do this in partnership with each other. This is a grant-funded project through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so with the support of New Buildings Institute, who applied for the grant funding on our behalf, we put together this concept and this team. And so you can see we've got the state energy offices of both Arizona and New Mexico. We've got a ton of really amazing technical partners, engagement partners to really help us ground this in that people-centric and perspective. We're also supported by a roughly 24-member technical advisory group. Mike and Clayton, who are our building officials on the call, serve on that. Greg is a lead in running the technical group. So the second presentation, after we talk a little bit about building codes, is really going to go into detail about the work that group and those partners are doing on kind of the technical and climate resilience side of it. We also have a roughly dozen-member equity advisory panel that is, as Shay mentioned earlier, being led by her with support from SDR. And her presentation later will talk about that piece of it and how we're bringing that people-centric perspective into the code development process. Next slide. So we're really going to focus on the first these outcomes today, which is the actual what we're calling regional resilience code. But there are other elements to what we're doing here. The resilience code really is focused on like what can we do now to improve resilience of our buildings and our built environment. The net zero roadmap is really two pieces. One, addressing things or recommending policies or strategies that cannot be addressed in building codes, but are still supportive of this overall goal of resilient built environment, but also kind of takes a longer term look at, you know, what are our goals for the future? And it's really heavily embedded in some of the sustainability planning and climate planning that the jurisdictional partners have done. And then to help with achieving and implementing these things, implementation resources through our website, one technical sets of resources to help with the building departments and the industry themselves actually adopt and implement, but then also community resources that are more aimed at helping residents understand the role that they can have in having a resilient home and a resilient built environment. Next slide. So there's 4 phases to this project. 3 phases to this project. We're just wrapping up this month the first phase, which is really getting our committees established and doing some initial outreach like we're doing today. Also doing surveys and interviews of building departments to understand their challenges and their needs more. And then using all of that information to kind of develop the scope for what we thought the code and the roadmap and those implementation resources would look like. So we're just at the phase of really detailing out where we think we're going to go with these. We will be very shortly launching into actually developing them. And there will be additional opportunities at that point to see draft code language and be able to provide input, see the roadmap and the implementation resources as well. And then the final phase is, really just publishing all of this, launching the implementation resources, which is website based. We'll be doing more outreach, but really focus more on the education side and helping people understand, what it is that we've done, how those things are important in community and personal resilience, and how they can be adopted and utilized. And then we'll come back and do some training for building departments and industry to kind of help them understand in more detail what we've done and how they can potentially benefit from that. So, and with that.
Thank you, Leslie. This is Clayton. Apologies in advance. I'm experiencing a little network lag, so I'm going to leave the video off and save my bandwidth for the audio. Next slide, please. My primary topic is going to be the history of building codes and how they relate to people. The protection of health, safety, and welfare of the public by creating safe buildings and communities is the solemn responsibility of all building safety staff. But this is not new. You can go really far back in time and see how laws have been created to ensure the safety of buildings. Going all the way back to 2200 BC, the king of the Babylonian Empire, Hammurabi, wrote the first known building safety law. And it's a little extreme, but bear with me here. It says, if a builder builds a house for a man and it does not make its construction firm, and the house which he has built collapses and causes the death of the owner of the house, that builder shall be put to death. Now, I point this out because it's essential that we feel safe when we enter a building. And if you think about it, most people never question their safety when they walk into a building. And that's directly related to holding builders responsible for making them safe. Major catastrophes have throughout history created a public demand for building regulations. The photo you see on the right of this slide is the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. Interestingly, the seismic event caused many of the buildings to collapse, but it was the broken gas lines that caused the fires that ultimately destroyed 3/4 of the city. And also, their first building code was adopted 3 years later. And that's pretty common. After major catastrophes or disasters, cities improved their building codes. If you look at the Great Boston Fire, 1872, it established the need for fire-rated walls. Coconut Grove Fire in 1942 established the limitations of flammable finishes. The Pioneer Hotel Fire in 1970 marked the start of automatic sprinklers here in Tucson. And the Station Nightclub Fire in 2003 taught us that egress doors need to swing in the direction of travel so as not to trap people inside the building when they're trying to get out. So it is pretty common for codes to be adopted right within 1 to 3 years after a major event. And in short, building codes protect people against themselves and their best intentions. The insurance industry has also played a major role in code adoption by either raising premiums or even refusing coverage for regions with poor building regulations. And that was true for the San Francisco fire that we see in this picture. The insurance industry actually was a major driving factor because the businesses refused to rebuild unless they had some assurance from the city that they were going to be protected to some level. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Baxley.
Thank you, Clayton. So let's talk a little bit right now about codes and resilience already baked into the code. It's nothing new that codes are resilient. Currently, we have all of our codes have resilience baked in with regards to how they are constructed. They are built to withstand multiple types of conditions such as wind, seismic, flooding. We don't realize this as we walk into a building, but there's a lot of time has spent in making sure that the building has great structural foundation for it. We talk about the exterior of the building, and once again, we have resilience baked into it where it's going to withstand the elements from the outside, where we're going to see, rain, and you want to make sure that you're dry inside your building, that the exterior is not damaged to where it is no longer functionable because of snow or hail. We have more resilience baked into the code in being able to manage the temperature fluctuations, especially here in the desert Southwest, where we can see extreme high temperatures. And then in other areas of the Southwest, we're going to see some extreme low temperatures too. And then last but not least, there's a lot of effort in the codes showing that, how to keep mold out of your house. We no longer have the issues of mold because we have changed the codes to when their structures are built per code, that mold doesn't show up inside the structure like it used to. More recently, we have other resilience baked into the codes for things such as, we took a look at water scarcity many years ago, and we started reducing consumption by the use of low flow fixtures. And then solar heat gain was another thing that was tackled by the codes. And we use cool roofs to do that. Low E windows. Many people may not understand what a low E window is, but the best way to try and put it in layman's terms is if you walk in front of an old window, you feel how warm it is and hot, and maybe your carpet or your material on your couch fades over time because of all that light coming through. Well, a low E window will work to block that. It provides better insulation and makes your house more resilient over time. And then as a result of taking care of those issues like we had for mold in the past, we made these houses incredibly tight. And because of that, we started to get sick homes or buildings. And we no longer have those issues because codes went back, took a look at things, and changed the requirements for indoor air quality to where we bring in outside air. It is forced into a building to make up to it. So it's no longer a stagnant air. It's not just being recycled. You're getting fresh air coming in from the outside of the building throughout its lifetime. And with that, next slide.
So
Clayton?
Thank you, Mike. So when we talk about the codes being adopted or changed, it's really important to consider that this is a consensus-based process. There's more than 20 different committees with the ICC assigned to different codes or different sections of the codes. And there's additional committees for the National Fire Protection Agency that also drive code language. So there's 2 public comment periods open to the public that anyone can make code proposals for, speak for or against code proposals, request changes to existing codes, or suggest that new codes are created. And this is an ongoing process where, as we learn more about buildings or as we experience different events that drive the need to change the codes, and or it could be just new technologies or new products come onto the market and we change how we build buildings, then the codes need to move along with that process. So following the public hearing proposals for new codes, then each new code proposal is voted on. And whereas the public or the general public or industry experts can make those code proposals, it's actually government staff or government representatives that are doing the voting on those codes. So state and local government representatives that serve in different development services departments provide that voting process, and it's more than 1,500 folks that participate in that vote. And then this process occurs every 3 years. So every 3 years, a new building code is published based on those advancements in building science and understanding. And then, so that is how the model codes are developed, but then they need to be adopted locally. So at the local level or state level, the codes are reviewed by non-governmental committees to assess the applicability to their unique region or goals and priorities for that community. And then they will develop amendments to change the code or modify it slightly for their unique conditions locally. And then it has to go through their elected body for an adoption. And the real take-home point is that there's public involvement at every level. And this is really consensus-based. And so, as described earlier, the codes tend to be retroactive, which is to say after a catastrophe occurs, then the codes are modified to prevent similar disasters. But they don't have to be. And one of the things that we're focusing on is what kind of hazards are legitimate risks that we should prepare for in advance and bake that into the code for additional resiliency. Next slide.
So thanks, Clayton. So how do the normal everyday people intersect with the codes? How do, we take a lot of things for granted when we're inside a building, but let's take some examples here and see how the codes work to help protect the individuals. When you walk into your bathroom this morning in your residence, you probably notice, or you don't notice, that there is an outlet in there and the GFCI protection. And those are those outlets that have the little buttons on them that will trip every once in a while. Well, the reason they're there is to protect you from electrocution. And those are required inside the bathrooms. But I bet you don't realize that the code required the distance to be more than 3 feet from tubs and showers. That way you can't reach out and plug in your radio, your shaver, or whatever you may have, and use it in that wet environment. Codes went further on to keep people safe by implementing anti-scald requirements. Long gone are the tubs that had 3 handles on them, one for the hot water, one for the cold water, and then one to turn on the shower if you had one. Now we have valves that combine the hot and cold water, and they're already set to a maximum temperature to where we don't have people accidentally get scalded because of just having the hot water on. More recently, we had carbon monoxide detectors become a requirement in the code. We've had smoke detectors for years. But the carbon monoxide detectors, that protects everybody from the invisible gas. Carbon monoxide is odorless. You can't see it, but it can be prevalent from fuel burning appliances or from a vehicle running in the garage. And by having these code mandated now, we wind up protecting all the occupants and making sure that they have an early warning device that will let them know to get out of the house and seek fresh air. And then last but not least is, the permit plan review and inspection process. We all understand that, building codes are there for our general well-being. However, sometimes it's not convenient. And so especially homeowners may not get those permits when they're required. But what those provide you is the peace of mind to know that it was done right, to make sure that it is correct, that qualified individuals came to your site and made sure that the electrical is done correctly, that you're not going to have sick homes because of the lack of fresh air intake. And so it is really not just goal setting for these things, but they are actually a required portion of any construction project. Clayton?
So what we're trying to demonstrate here is that the codes really improve livability in the homes, in the built environment, in public spaces. Everyone needs shelter, but the codes provide that minimum bar that builders need to meet to make sure that that shelter meets their basic needs. And it goes a little bit further. Mike talked about, air quality, healthy air spaces. The codes require minimum quantities of ventilation, both exhausting air and bringing fresh air in. And that's, again, based on what humans need in the built environment for a healthy home. So we're talking about safety. We're talking about health. We're also talking about comfort. The temperature control that Mike was talking about is baked throughout the code. And then overall convenience. And again, the codes are a minimum bar, right? It's the bare bones minimum to ensure that we are meeting all of the criteria for that built environment. And then last, but certainly not least, is the requirement for sanitation. We need hot water in order to, effectively cleanse our hands. We need sewage disposal systems that not only convey waste away from the building, but stop sewer gases from coming back into the building. And all of these things relate back to the basic livability needs of our built environment. And that goes as far as individual dwelling units, all the way up to skyscraper housing, multifamily housing, to the convenience store or the office that you work in. And that's throughout the entire code intent, we are talking about livability. Next slide.
So why are codes so important to us? Well, it's obvious they provide protection and safety, but they prevent us from our own mistakes. I love this picture on the left of the water heater being installed, and it's really kind of hard to tell, but you see a box at the top of it, between it and the wall. That happens to be the disconnect that's required by code. Unfortunately, when they installed that water heater, the disconnect is no longer accessible. Those are the kinds of things that an inspector is going to come and look and make sure that the occupants will be safe in the future. The other picture that we have on this slide is comical in itself. I don't think you can kind of make it out. Maybe you can once we say, but that's a medicine cabinet. The door's open, and some individual thought it would be great to put the sub panel behind the medicine cabinet. You can still reach in and grab those breakers, but it doesn't provide the proper access that would be required by code. But codes do more than, just protect us from our own mistakes or, to be quite honest, stupidity sometimes. But they also provide for durability. We want to make sure that these structures live long past what we would consider our useful time while we own those structures. We want it to continue on into the future. And then we want to make sure that they're resilient. They need to be able to withstand the elements and withstand over time. And then also, let's talk about the structural integrity of them. As you walk into a building, it is almost never crosses your mind that, wow, I wonder if this building is going to stand up this whole time that I'm in there. It might do it if we were inside of a really bad storm, an earthquake, but the codes ensure that structural integrity is there and is there to protect you. And it also is there to make sure that you can get out of a structure whenever an emergency arises. And last but not least, our codes bring us peace of mind. Because of the fact that you don't think of that, unless you happen to be a code geek like some of us, where you go into a hotel and you're automatically looking for the exit signs. But for the normal population, they just have to know that they're safe in there. And if an emergency does happen, there's going to be some form of direction how to get them out of that building. And so last but not least on this whole entire thing is codes are always important. They're baked into our everyday life. And the reason that they are so successful is because we don't realize that they're there protecting us each and every day. Clayton?
All right. Mike, I think now we're heading over to Greg for the risk and hazard framework.
Okay. Thanks, Mike and Clayton. That was great. It's really nice to get a background on our building codes. Now we're going to take some time and kind of talk through exactly what our framework was in moving into our code that we're looking at right now. So we as a collaborative were tasked with looking at resilience and efficiency in the Southwest. And when we first come into this, we could really have a lot of people getting into one room and we could be talking about, let's adopt this code, let's adopt that code, let's increase everything by 10%. And we really wanted to come back and define, okay, if we're tasked with resilience, what does that really mean? What do we need to build codes for in the Southwest? And resilience, as we went through the definition in the beginning, was we need to be able to have buildings and communities that can withstand hazards. So we first needed to define what are the hazards that we have. And our definition that we started with here was natural and human-caused risks posed to a local or regional site based on environmental, social, cultural, and economic conditions. And then we had to look at, specifically for us in the Southwest, how big of a risk are those different hazards that we address? Some hazards may be big risks, some may be more minor. So the risk was the extent to which a site, building, community, or individuals are vulnerable to a negative impact of hazards. So next slide. So going into that, we first started with looking at the Southwest. And so the area that was really defined for us in our jurisdiction that we're looking at is Arizona and New Mexico. Hopefully other states learn from this, but this is where we really wanted to key in and focus on. So how do we identify the hazards and the risks? Well, in our next slide here, we're going to be looking at, this is the FEMA National Risk Index. So it breaks out all the different counties and it starts to lay out what are the different hazards and what are the level of risks. So in this map that we got from the FEMA National Risk Index, this one was for coastal flooding. So you can see on the left and the right that we see a lot of colors there, giving different levels of risk because these are coastal areas. But as we see in Arizona and New Mexico, no risks of that there. So next slide. As we went through each of these different hazards, we could start to see, okay, a heat wave risk. Now we're starting to see some color and some risks falling into the Arizona and New Mexico area. But even then, as we see a heat wave risk, there's a lot in Arizona. There is some in New Mexico too, but both states have areas where that may not be the biggest risk. So we're looking at, okay, what levels do we kind of need to deal with? What are the most important things? How do we deal with different areas of the different states? And then going into our next slide, focusing in directly right here on Arizona, New Mexico, we can get to another category like wildfire risk, a definite hazard that we have. Every area of the map is touched by this, but again, we see different levels of risk. You can see more rural areas will have a higher risk. You'll see areas that have more forest will have more risk. So then we can kind of identify what are those bigger risks and which areas are those really impacting. Next slide. So then as we went in there, these were some of the FEMA National Risk Index actual categories on there. So obviously we quickly knocked off things like coastal flooding, avalanche, but we're able to hone in on what are the actual risks there. So even right here, we started pulling out from FEMA, there's cold waves, there's heat waves, we have drought. Surprisingly, there's even some earthquake, wildfire. But again, these ones have different risks in different areas. Next slide. And really what we wanted to see here is we're getting a lot of data here. We're getting a lot of maps, but we really wanted our response here as this collaborative to be focused on real responses to real life situations. So that's one of the big reasons that we got our group together, and having all these different municipalities, different people, we could actually speak to real risks that we're seeing out here. So we don't want to be like we saw in Texas, the next area that has a flood and we see deaths and we see damage and not be prepared for that. And we recently saw the fires that we saw in California that were not just impacting rural areas, but they're impacting even downtown areas. And you heard this in the code section of this presentation, is a lot of times codes are a response to hazards that already happened. And we can see them in other states, and we don't want to see those happen here, and then we respond to those. And we're seeing that those hazards are getting bigger and bigger. And then even ones that are not necessarily one-time events, but the water situations in Arizona, New Mexico, we're seeing our lakes depleted, we're seeing our water reserves depleted, we're seeing the watershed levels depleted. So these are the things that we really wanted to look at our municipalities, look at the areas where we live, talk to the people where we actually live, and come up with real elements that will respond to what we're actually seeing here. And we didn't want to just add more stuff to the code or increase levels of efficiency, but actually put in elements that impact these real life situations. Next slide. So after going through the FEMA list and sitting down with different groups, different municipalities, what the areas of resilience that we really defined as high priority hazards that we need to address, we came up with this list here. So the bold words that you can see there were extreme heat, and we saw this in both states. We saw extreme cold. We saw air quality, and this could be the form of like dust storms. We could do this with pollution. Our fourth category was wildfires and how these impact urban and rural areas. Water scarcity, grid outages, and being able to keep energy and power going and when there are hazards or when it's overloaded, losing power. So grid outages were a hazard. Precipitation flooding, so flooding that's caused by rain events. And then last was affordability and natural practices. So also identifying that just economically, affordability is a big issue that we deal with in the building codes in our areas, and still being able to actually implement some of our natural practices that we see, some of the things that the Southwest was really built on in our architecture, in our communities, and how do we actually make sure that those stay within our codes. Next slide. So this is very small and you're not expected to read it because I don't even think I can read it on there. But this is to kind of give you an idea of what our process looked like in actually breaking down these. So once we got those hazards, we could go into here and look at an item like extreme heat. And we broke it down. So you can see the first category, extreme heat. And then we broke it down to, well, what are the outcomes that we would want to see? And that first one up there is heat island mitigation. So to respond to heat, extreme heat, we were hoping that we could bring down the heat island and reduce temperatures. And so then that third column are looking at ways, what are actual code measures that we could look at? And that could be cool roof items. It could be looking at the hardscapes around there. And then the fourth column that we're seeing is proposed code changes that we could make inside of the code, and what could we actually affect, or what is there already in the code that we could push further? What are the resources? And then we started building on how we could actually build something that this could work inside of. So we did this for each one of those hazard categories. Next slide. So at the end of this, after going through it and kind of working through that with each different hazard, we're able to put together a list of code measures that we were hoping to implement into actual codes. And what we found that was interesting is as we started coming up with different solutions for different hazards, we found that they were meeting multiple different hazards in here. So this is just a couple of the ones that we've been starting with that we're kind of in the process right now of working through. But you can see even here that cool roofs, the second item on there, you know, it impacts extreme heat, but it also helps us when there is grid outages, or cool hardscapes when we have more shade, when we're cooling the areas around it. It helps with heat, but it also helps with water retention on site. And so we were trying to find and look at measures that would actually help with different risks and exposures that we had as communities. So this is a list of only maybe 10 or 12 on here. We actually have probably close to 80 or 100 that could span all these different categories. So we're really trying to come up with different measures that really make large impacts in these areas. Next slide. So now that we take these resources, we had to look at how do we actually help the Southwest with these. And one of the unique things about the Southwest is, you know, New Mexico has a state energy code, but in Arizona, we're kind of the Wild West. Each municipality has its own energy code, and we have different municipalities on 2018, some adopting 2024, some might have older codes. And we have rural and we have urban areas, but we have such a diverse set of municipalities. And so looking at this is we really wanted it to be a resource for the Southwest that worked for all these areas, not just as a state code and not just for Phoenix or Tucson, but that it worked for the Buckeyes and the Chandlers and the Albuquerques and the smaller cities as well. And so our goal was come up with a resource that works for all, but also work in there so it's customizable for our cities, so that depending on if you're an urban or a rural city, you can customize that to make it really work for what you can do. So there may be certain municipalities that they could adopt all of this and they have the resources, and there may be other municipalities that say, hey, I love this idea. We can adopt 3 of these. Maybe next year we can throw in another one, or we can work these into our codes. And so what we really wanted to do is build it in that way. So ultimately we've kind of identified those code measures that we're working on now. Now we're trying to put them in a format where it's an appendix, hopefully, that could be adopted by municipalities, but they could adopt maybe a couple of those measures. So what it'll ultimately look like is maybe 30 or 50 measures that municipalities choose from and can adopt, and that we provide the resources so that everybody's kind of on the same page and we have consistency, and people have resources where if they don't have an explicit green building reviewer or resilience reviewer, they still have the resources and the background and the information to actually implement that in their own municipality. Next slide.
So Greg, we'll move on to the next presentation, but I just wanted to raise a couple questions.
Sure.
That came in through the Q&A. Let me know if these are good to clarify now, or if you want to hold these until the end. But there's 2 questions with respect to the resilience categories. So one is how about biodiversity degradation? Is that included somewhere?
So there are sections with biodiversity inside of there, and looking at those areas, and those are areas that we have identified. A lot of what we have to be careful of and what we're trying to work in on our own codes right now is what falls underneath building codes and what needs to be goals set by municipalities that are more in their zoning codes. So we're kind of working at attacking those from 2 different angles. Right now, what we're working in these measures is specifically things that we can implement in the building codes. But there were categories that didn't make it in there, but ones that we did focus in on. And I'd say biodiversity does fall into some of our categories, especially when it comes to sites and how that helps with fire barriers or heat island resilience or having less pavement. It may not be explicitly called out, but we're trying to find good ways that we could actually integrate that. So our list is not set and final, but those are some of the feedback and ideas that we're trying to get into our codes right now.
All right, thanks for that. The one more. Let me actually, Clayton, I see your hand up. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to address one of the questions related to Adobe and straw bale. The question is, about the affordability or the expense associated with these building methods. And I just want to point out that, from my experience, these methods of construction are often more expensive from a labor perspective, not necessarily from a material acquisition perspective. So if a customer is, attempting to hire a contractor to do Adobe with on-site materials or, straw bale, then they most likely will pay more in the labor costs compared to light frame construction, which has over time been developed to be one of the cheapest methods of building buildings. So it has less to do, from my perspective, about some sort of mass production of these types of buildings, but making those materials and methods available to the public is critical to make sure that we have that option. And often, or most likely, one of the least expensive ways to build a straw bale building is by the owner builder, right? Where they can build the building themselves and acquire the materials themselves and really cut down their costs in that way.
I think
Lynn-
Shay, comment as well.
Yeah, I just, on that same topic, just wanted to add that in the hazard framework, affordability and natural building practices didn't necessarily coincide. They're not necessarily, they were basically the two topics that fell outside of the FEMA hazard index. So that's why they're kind of lumped together. It wasn't necessarily that natural building practices are affordable, but I agree with what Clayton is saying, that absolutely, from my experience as well, I've seen owner builder teams come in and literally build projects themselves and organize volunteers and friends and community members to make projects happen. And I've seen, at the residential scale, a desire for projects like that, which is why we have that topic included.
Let me really quick. So I just want to make sure folks know the question that was being asked and responded to by Clayton and Shay. So the question was this: I'm always told by architects that Adobe, straw bale, and natural building resources are too expensive. I'm surprised to see them in affordability. How can we make natural building actually affordable and not a privilege for people who can afford it? So those were responses to that. And then I want to go back to Greg for one more potential clarifying question. So back under the resilience categories, why would you have solar gain under extreme cold rather than extreme heat?
So that's a great point in there. So solar gain is, so when we're talking about the glass and what we're getting from solar gain in the glass, it can, by lowering your solar heat gain, you can raising your solar heat gain coefficient on there, you can actually bring more heat in. And that's the reason it's under extreme cold, is because that's not something that we typically do. We're under extreme heat. It's already built into the code right now as having a very low solar heat gain. So again, that was a very minor list to kind of show some examples maybe of areas that we were thinking about or looking at. But right now we're really in the process of starting to build those codes and implement them. And even what Shay and Clayton were talking about, I think we could maybe even vet that out a little bit more at the end during the Q&A session to kind of go into that a little bit further. And I think what Shay has to talk about in her section will help address some of those as well. But I think what I'd hope you'd really see in that section is that we saw exactly what you're talking about. We need to embrace elements like mass in our buildings that potentially can help with grid outages and holding in temperatures, and those type of materials really go against fire and being able to recover from fire and build after fire. But we were also tasked with how do we figure out how to do that cost effectively. And so we put that as a category, we put that as a challenge, and that's what we're working through right now is how do you promote those? How do you implement those in a cost-effective way and a way to promote those for all groups, for all municipalities. But also, again, we wanted to make it so we can adopt it. People can adopt it and customize it, where it's not necessarily that we're forcing all projects and all buildings to do straw bale or more expensive elements. So I think that kind of answers it.
All right. Thank you, Greg. And thanks for these questions. I see a couple more. We're going to hold those until the end. And for now, we're going to turn it over to Shay for rural and residential considerations.
Hi, everyone. So yes, again, my name is Sharia Jimenez. I go by Shay. So in the group, I've been working with here as part of the resiliency code effort. I worked with a group called the Equity Advisory Panel, and we have a lot of different organizations represented in our group, folks from nonprofits, advocates for housing, for affordable housing, even manufactured housing advocates in our group. We've had really great discussions about equity, but we also wanted to kind of move beyond equity and really broaden it to talk about how we're really looking at a people-centered approach in our group. And the common threads we found were really about looking at things at the code through a rural lens as well as a residential lens. So on the rural side, we're looking at townships and communities living in rural areas, tribal areas, even rural homesteads. And then in the residential perspective, we have represented, individual homeowners, the DIY homeowner community, which I think is really unique to the Southwest. We know we have a lot of owner builders still in our communities, manufactured homes, and then again, there was a desire in our group to look at existing buildings and traditional vernacular building practices. And what I mean by vernacular building practices, I have a great definition right here I want to pull up, is our buildings that are designed and constructed for ordinary people based on local needs, available materials, and cultural traditions, rather than by formally schooled architects. So I think that we all know, in the Southwest, we have the tradition of adobe. Again, we're seeing a rise in straw bale. We know that these types of buildings that use thermal mass are really effective here in our climate. Next slide, please. So when we look at the code, some of the potential ICC codes that we could be looking at are the IRC, the International Residential Code, the Existing Building Code, perhaps the Green Construction Code, the National Green Building Standard, and potentially the Property Maintenance Code. Next slide, please. And in our code development process, our group really, it interacts with the technical side. We're seeing our two groups kind of having a dialogue together where the TAG puts forward code measures and really leans into their expertise in that way, and then us through our lenses, looking at this rural and residential perspective, we then vet that code and really kind of try to keep the community perspective at the center of what we're looking at. And we see the TAG really focused more on the municipalities and the jurisdictional authorities and kind of looking at things from that angle. So we hope to have kind of a balanced approach in this code development as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so as we were beginning to have discussions in our group as to how we go about evaluating code, we thought it would be really helpful to begin to develop a scoring criteria and matrix, and really be clear about what our perspective is and how we're evaluating code language that comes our way. So we really wanted to look at affordability, both long and short-term costs, durability, maintenance, And then accessibility, and accessibility, you know, could be a wide range of things, from accessible design principles to accessible materials, accessible construction practices, accessible, you know, is it accessible for a homeowner or someone who's a do-it-yourselfer? Accessible language, and then is it something that's implementable for rural jurisdictions or enforceable by rural jurisdictions? And I see a question in the chat I want to respond to really quick. The EAP, sorry for the acronyms, the EAP is the Equity Advisory Panel, which I was helping to lead, and the TAG was the Technical Advisory group, which Greg was leading. So those are kind of our two main, I guess, committees, if you will, on the project. Next slide, please. And then we also wanted to include some additional, probably what will be bonus scoring criteria. We really had a lot of discussions about site sustainability and systems, looking at passive survivability, and how we can include really high impact, you know, sustainable measures that are hopefully low cost. Things like passive solar design really don't cost any money to build into a project, but it's about thinking through, yeah, solar gain. Do you want solar gain? Do you not want solar gain? Where do you want solar gain on the northeast, south, or west sides? And how does the solar orientation affect all of that? So, active solar harvesting, you know, building readiness and solar readiness are concepts that have been implemented here in Tucson that have pretty low costs, but again, make sure that we're ready for the technology if and when it's available. Passive water harvesting, you know, with berms and basins, again, are pretty low cost but high impact. Active water harvesting is slightly more expensive, but if you're using the water harvesting for landscape, it's pretty low cost and easy to implement. Shade, you know, through trees or through you know, awnings or porches, overhangs. There's so many ways to provide shade for windows and even the walls, you know, to help reduce solar gain if you want. We talked about also access to utilities and how that's threatened in rural communities. Some rural communities are struggling to even have basic access to utilities, but also in a grid outage, we all, you know, will struggle with this with this problem. How do we access, you know, basic services? We talked a lot about green infrastructure, and the need for, you know, vegetated shaded streets and, you know, vegetated urban areas. And we talked a lot about passive ventilation strategies too, everything from fans to operable windows. And then we also are wanting to look at this and see if these codes are scalable to a single family residence or to an existing building. A lot of the existing green codes that exist are more at a commercial level. So we want to see if we can scale some of those ideas down. And then alternative means and methods, again, as already mentioned, we want to be looking at vernacular building practices and how we can basically legalize those if they're not already legal, as a way to promote them and get them more widespread and potentially mainstream. And we know that some of these vernacular practices already exist as appendixes or I-codes or locally adopted ordinances. So it's just more a matter of getting this all this information kind of centralized, which at least in Arizona is kind of can vary widely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So next slide, please. And so here's kind of just a diagram. If you could kind of toggle back between those two images. Thank you, Brian. One image is showing, you know, summer solar with an overhang on the south side, you know, just a porch. We can get shade in the summer. And then if it's sized correctly, that overhang, it will allow access, you know, solar access in the winter, which will help heat the home passively. This is kind of the classic diagram of a passive, you know, solar home, solar orientation. Also, we're showing here solar harvesting with panels, water harvesting with a cistern, shade trees planted in the solar arc on the east, north, and west sides of the building to help with cooling. Showing shade, the shade structure with the porch. And we're showing berms and basins to help water those trees passively that will collect water from the roof. So these are all, again, pretty low cost strategies that we know can be very effective in resiliency. Next slide, please. I think that's it for me.
All right, we'll turn it back to Leslie to wrap up the formal presentation.
Right. And I'm gonna try to tackle a couple of the open questions too as I talk through this. So just want to go back to kind of the outcomes for this overall project. And so what you've heard today is kind of the scope and direction for the Regional Resilience Code itself. But there also is going to be this longer term roadmap that will also address things outside the building code. So some of the earlier questions raised about, is it going to address, degradation of natural habitat? That's probably not something that can be directly addressed in a building code, but there may be policies or strategies related to climate resilience and kind of certainly urban landscape and broader landscape that we could address. And we're just starting that process of figuring out, what the full scope of that roadmap is. And two of the questions, one is, do you think building officials will embrace these standards? Will they need training in how to apply the codes to design drawings or performing inspections? Do you imagine performance-based or prescriptive codes? And then a second one, do you have recommendations for how local governments can incentivize these code recommendations? Do you recommend that they're adopted as mandatory code? So I'm going to take them in pieces. One of the really core parts of this project was those implementation resources and the education and training that we're going to be providing in the last phase of this project, because we feel like there's a higher likelihood that that some of this will be adopted by communities if we can provide that support and provide that education and help them have these conversations. So that's a really important part of it. And a lot of what we're thinking in terms of these resources, the way we kind of categorized it is like there's marketing and community engagement resources. So we're thinking about things like, well, can we have letters of support and FAQs and policy language to encourage state level advocacy? And then also education and training that may be a little more industry focused, where we've got, if we have energy modeling or cost assessments, sample plans, case studies, best practices, and then technical support and compliance support for billing departments themselves. So, checklists and things like sample incentive programs. So it's really meant to be a full package of support through those resources and the training that we're going to be providing, and as well as the more non-technical community-based resources. The question about, are we recommending adoption? It was really important to us, particularly with Arizona being, local code adoption, to not ask that it be used in a particular way. So we're going the route of being supportive and hoping that education and hoping that those resources will help those communities make that decision, rather than us going out and just go, here, adopt. So can we go back a slide real quick? Yeah. So just to reiterate, this is still scoping. We're still just trying to figure out like the frameworks, and Greg alluded to, like, we haven't really launched into developing the codes. It's just trying to figure out like what are we trying to focus on, and what are, what's the scope of that. We're going to start that soon. There will be more opportunities for people to provide input. I put the project website in the chat. As those opportunities arise, we'll put that out there. And then just to reiterate, the last phase of this does have that education, training, and even opportunities for building departments to be certified on energy code as energy code specialists to even give them more resources for potential adoption. So, and that is it. Brian, turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I'm going, so we're at the Q&A section, and of course we've already been answering questions, but I do want to, I'll stop sharing here, and I also want to see, Lisa, if there's anything that hasn't been answered or anything that needs to come back up, and then I'll turn to our team to see if they want to re-respond or add anything to any of the questions that have already been responded to. So Lisa.
Yeah, I think we've actually captured most things. It's more if we've caught all of the sub questions. I don't know if this was technically answered, but there was a piece of one of those more recent questions about performance-based or prescriptive codes. Was there anything more to add on that?
It could be a mix of both, and I think just reminding people we're trying to give as much flexibility in these. But I think a great example of how it could work is for an item like if we came up with a code measure that was directed towards passive survivability, we might give like 5 or 6 options and say, hey, choose one of these, like do an energy model, or utilize mass in your building in some shape or form, or provide shading in there. But we're trying to give some flexibility and some opportunity for the cities to customize that. So it could come in the form of prescriptive or performance, but our number one goal is to give flexibility. So I would probably see an option for both of those in there.
Okay. Was there anything that the project team folks on the line here wanted to go back and add to, re-respond to?
I just wanted to add on to what Leslie said about how it could be adopted. We wanted to make it as flexible as possible, and that is our goal. So we could see municipalities adopting this as mandatory. We could see municipalities using this as a voluntary code. We could see them using it as a negotiation tool that says, hey, if you want to do this, we want you to follow these rules. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd love to see it mandatory, but we also know that that's not necessarily feasible at this time for everybody. So again, giving flexibility, giving the resources that municipalities can implement it successfully, because that's what we really want to see is a successful code.
Okay.
There was also a question about incentivizing the recommendations. I was curious if someone on the team wanted to tackle that one. I don't think we addressed it.
That's one of the categories of resources that we're looking at either having in the roadmap or the implementation guide is suggesting incentive programs that jurisdictions might utilize. So not saying you need to make it part of an incentive program, but are there models out there that we can share that a municipality could use? And and I think Kevin or Greg or someone on a previous meeting had mentioned like reduction in permit processing time, expedited. That might work in some communities and not others, but we're looking to at least propose those.
And incentives can come in different forms, just like Leslie said. So it could be in time shaved off. It could be with bonus development, bonus floors, and maybe even hopefully this gets in front of our utility companies, and maybe there's some shape or form where our utility companies are utilizing some of the resources that we provided to provide utility incentives. So again, hopefully we'd love to see that. Everything's on the table at this point, and the more it gets used, the happier we're going to be with it.
All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in. Looking at our team, I'm not seeing any more responses. So we are going to go ahead and close out for tonight. And I just want to thank everybody for your participation. I want to thank our panelists. I know it's late and it's getting dark outside, so really appreciate your guys' attention and just your energy for being here tonight. And thank you. So we will, the plan is and the hope is that we will share the materials, either this presentation or the materials from this session. So please be on the lookout for that. And otherwise, just want to wish you a good evening. And again, thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone.